North Africa and Southwest Asia. Now, let's get started right away because we did some record time last time, so the stakes are high. And move over, Steve Harvey, because we got a good one for you today. North Africa and Southwest Asia, Part 1. We're going to be talking about 21 different countries. This is, again, not our biggest region because we had that of Europe, which was 40 plus countries, but 21 different countries here. That of North Africa, geographically, the continent of Africa, and that of the northern portion, and Southwest Asia, this large Eurasian continent between Europe and what we would know as Asia. And Turkey is going to be a little bit of a different situation because they do have a little piece of them that's sometimes considered Europe, but it's considered Southwest Asia at this point. So we have North Africa, Southwest Asia, the Arabian Peninsula, North Africa, Iran, which is not Arab, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So these are our countries. This is our sort of area. Like usual, we jump right in with some of the physical geography, but this time a little different because I shake things up, got to keep things interesting, and the Middle East. So a lot of people would think, though, this is a chapter on the Middle East. Wrong. No. We don't refer to it as the Middle East because it's a Euro or Amerocentric term, the Middle East. The Middle East is what we would call the Middle East, is this area, yes, geographically speaking, from an American standpoint. And we tend to refer to things like that because, well, we put it here. But when we're thinking about this around the world, for the Russians or for those in South or East Asia, like China or Japan or India or something, this is certainly not the Middle East to them. It's the West, not the West like we would call it. That's going to get things confusing for sure. Now we're going to have everybody confused. The West to those people are like Western Europe and West in the United States and things. The West, yes. But geographically speaking, it's West. It's not the middle of the globe for them. It's not the East. So again, we don't use that term, the Middle East. It usually refers to just that sort of that tight area around the Mediterranean, like Israel and places like that. So we're going to shake that. It's going to be North Africa and Central Asia. So, not Central Asia. The Middle East is no longer what we're going to use. We're going to be referring to North Africa and Southwest Asia. North Africa, Southwest Asia, not the Middle East, because it doesn't do us a justice for geography. This is a geography class. What you may think when we talk about North Africa and Southwest Asia, you may think conflict. You may think hot, dry, oil, camels, sand, desert, I don't know, oppression of women, perhaps, Islam, Muslim, Judaism, Christianity, perhaps, although probably not the first thing that comes to your mind, and we'll explain that, we'll talk about that. This is what you may think. That's fair. We'll talk about it. This is what you should think. Not all the Middle East is something that you would have some sort of generalization or stereotype that you would think about. Some of these things that are depicted on our news or what happens in the course of human history in this part of the world, it's certainly a region that is very diverse and one that pushes beyond those perceptions that we have in our mind of what we think the North Africa and Southwest Asia really is. Boy, that is a clunky term, isn't it? Just so unnatural sounding to use it. And I'm probably going to slip up on using that, but so look at this. People on their cell phone, they're protesting modern, progressive dress for women here. This is happening in Turkey, protesting Erdogan, Turkey, the authoritarian leader there in Turkey. Here, a picture from one of the Gulf states. This is an area that certainly has a ton of oil money, and they've put it into the infrastructure now. They're building skyscrapers and things like that, and it's certainly not something that you would maybe picture compared to what you would picture here, and to be, again, in the same region here as well. So look at it, urbanizing, wealth, some places, and look and see. And we're going to maybe expand our minds a little bit of what North Africa and Southwest Asia really is. Now here's where we mix things up. We normally talk about the physical geography first. Why? We get it out of the way. It sort of defines the place, and that's sort of important. It I usually have physical geography define the place, because what do I say? The land, the physical land and climate dictate or influence people there. Surely and certainly that is the case here as well, but I think for our purposes, it doesn't make sense to talk about religion in this region until the very end when we talk about those sociocultural issues, because it's sort of at play a lot earlier in this region than we would say otherwise. And again, that's not to generalize, but religion is a very contested issue here, and it's something that's quite important, and it influences a lot of aspects of society and this region. So we're going to talk about it first, and then we're going to go and sort of get back to normal schedule. Here we go. Monotheism, theism of religion, mono being one, the belief system based on the idea of only one God. Kind of important because the three major monotheistic religions of the world, okay, three major monotheistic one God belief systems in the world, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all centered here in and around in this region, have connections to this region, specifically the city of Jerusalem itself, city in Israel. Very contentious. Everybody's fighting for it. Everybody has religious beliefs and or artifacts or buildings or things that are tied to that city that they claim to be their own among the three different faiths, and it obviously leaves it a contentious issue. In American politics right now, there's a debate whether to move our U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, sort of making a statement there. We'll see what happens. But again, this city, very important, three major religions here, and we'll go from there. These religions are not only do they share geographic space, a place, Jerusalem, Israel, or this region of North Africa and Southwest Asia, but they're kind of similar in, again, belief system of one God, check. Geographic area, check. Religion of the region, a little bit of a tongue twister. Judaism, the Jewish faith, pulls its Torah, its book, from the first 5 books of the Christian Bible, or vice versa, depending, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, if you will, first 5 books of the Christian Bible are that is the Torah, and that is the book of faith there. Christianity, the Bible, the Christian Bible, and the Quran, that of the Islam faith, uses, of course, the Quran first and foremost, but it does pull from the Christian Bible as well. Kind of interesting. Book talks about it a little bit. We're not going to really talk about it much more than just that, just to show you that these religions are interrelated a little bit. And again, all trace themselves to this region. This a little less so important until we talk about right now. The Sunni-Shia split, or schism, which is a fancy word for split. 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide. Okay, Muslims, those one who would believe in Islam as a faith, monotheistic religion, one God, Allah. 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide. Here's a map, okay, of where practicing Islam or Muslim people are located. You can see that overwhelming Sunni majority. And right here, I have the stat. 85% of Muslims are Sunni Muslim, while only 15% are Shia Muslim or Shiites. And that's really important. That's the whole reason why I'm talking about religion and Islam up front, because as you can see, this is our region here, okay? We have North Africa and Southwest Asia, and you can see that overwhelming Sunni Muslim. But look what happens here. We have Iraq, same place, tomato. But look at it. There's a population there of Shiites, of Shia Muslims that you have to reckon with and get along with, or not. But then there's problems. And then you have Iran. And we know Iran is a little bit different compared to some other places in this region. In the global sense of the world, and perhaps they're aggressors in some situations, they're antagonizers, and they are a little different, and that's sort of why, in a way, and not to oversimplify that, but they are different because the dominant religion in the country, while still Muslim, is different from that of the rest of the Muslim faith that surrounds them. And again, not to have this isn't a religion class, but this is important geopolitically of why this sort of makes sense, and or why it doesn't make sense in terms of the conflicts and things and the relationships that take place between countries. Why do some countries support each other, others do not? Why do they dabble in each other's politics? This is sort of why. Still on the split, Mecca pilgrimage that Muslims are encouraged to take at least one point in their life. Interesting that Sunnis and Shiites both make this pilgrimage together. And so after the death of Muhammad in 632, the debate erupted in Islam. Who should replace him as the Prophet Muhammad? Here's the split. This is what happened. Again, simplifying, there's a lot of a history here, of course. But Sunnis called for Muhammad's trusted aide and friend, Abu Bakr, while Shiites said it should be his son-in-law and I think also cousin. Not sure about that, of the sort of family dynamics of what's going on there, but his son-in-law, Ali. And so you had your sort of divides there. Even, at some point, they both actually lead the Islamic faith, but they're killed, and then different people take over, and it's a whole thing. But again, oversimplifying for the sake of time, and for simplicity for our purposes. I mean, again, we have to cover the whole world, we have to cover this region, but this is a key characteristic of the region, something we should know and something we should understand, and hopefully we're picking up on what's sort of taking place here. Recap: Sunnis, Shiites. Sunnis are majority. I hope you said that sort of out loud to yourself as you were taking notes or watching this while having some other box pulled up on your computer, whatever you're doing. But Sunnis are majorities, about 85%. Shiites, minority. Both Islam, monotheistic religion, dominates the North Africa, Southwest Asian region, chapter 6. And here we go, back to our normal schedule, physical geography first. But the book actually starts to change it up. They talk about climate before they talk about landforms, which is totally different, but not really that different. You probably didn't even notice if I didn't say something, but here we are. We talk about the climate first, go back to the Köppen climate system. Perhaps you remember it. You should. I've said it several times. But here we go again. Classifications, the letters. Remember the A's were sort of hot and wet. Clearly not really at play here. It is hot, but it's not wet. Difference, that's sort of an equatorial thing, which is way down here, and you can see that, preview to sub-Saharan Africa. We're going to get into that next time, but that's sort of where you're going to get into your climate A. So forget a climate A right now. We're going to talk about climate B, hot and dry, or hot and cold, depending. But here we are. North Africa and Southwest Asia. Whew, this is going to be an easy one for the exam. I don't know, what's the dominant climate zone here in this region? Well, I don't know. Looks orange to me. It's certainly desert, okay? And there's a little bit of steppe going on, and the steppe is a transition zone sort of toward desert. Again, oversimplifying that, probably the physical geographers would say no way, but when we talk about desertification, we'll talk about what I mean when I went to say that. But that Mediterranean climate that seems to always work its way back in, but we're still in among the Mediterranean region, if you remember, part of the Pacific West in the United States. Mediterranean, of course, Mediterranean that of Europe, and also Mediterranean because North Africa shares the Mediterranean just as much as Europe does as well. And so you have this area that's, again, conducive for citrus fruits and nuts and things like that, and olives and that type of production that's happening there, agriculture speaking. But again, just think of that type of climate type, a little milder climate type that's happening there than a huge swath of desert and steppe and a little bit of continental climate in the Turkey and northern part of Iran. And again, Mediterranean, a little bit here as the Mediterranean sweeps this entire area. It's a big map, shouldn't have to demonstrate. But no other region in the world is as dry as this region that we're talking about. So remember that, probably would, anytime you hear all or none, those are sort of red flags, kind of a fact that we should remember. No other region is as dry. It kind of makes sense. It looks pretty dry to us from here. Some coastal and steppe areas conducive to limited vegetation, a little bit of agriculture. When we talk about natural agriculture, we'll talk a lot about irrigation. Well, we actually really won't talk a lot about irrigation, but we'll talk a little bit about irrigation because we never talk a lot about it. Anything, one thing in particular. But the Sahara Desert continues to expand and create less viable living space and space that's conducive for human life. And that Sahara Desert is expanding into the Sahel. And so this desert actually getting larger over time, and that's kind of important. The landscape, kind of a texty slide here, a lot of words, no pictures, so that's not fun, but there's pictures on the next one because I always try to include some pictures when we talk about the landscape. Atlas Mountains, right there, cause orographic rainfall in the region. What is orographic rainfall? Well, we've talked about it several times. Orographic rainfall is when moisture in the clouds come up and they rise up the mountain, and then they're forced to let go of that moisture before they go off in terms of the elevation, and it dissipates once it climbs that elevation. Red Sea separates North Africa from Southwest Asia. It sort of separates our two sub-regions, our two parts of our region. It separates that. Mountains exist at the edge, but again, Red Sea there. Turkey and Iran have some mountains and plateaus, a little bit of a highland area. That experienced rainfall, not that they're the only place that experienced rainfall in this region, but obviously a little bit more rainfall than that of the others. Regions home to the Nile River, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Probably have heard of those before. They're kind of famous rivers. Jordan River also here is much smaller than these. Tigris and Euphrates help form that Fertile Crescent. Mesopotamia, the sort of beginning of our human civilization. A lot of people stem it to this part of the world. Nile River, we'll talk about. Nile River here forms a delta. Remember, triangular feature here, the mouth of a river, exiting out to a larger body of water, the Mediterranean. And that flows northward, actually. So the Nile River is flowing northward. Red Sea. Any divers out there, put it on your bucket list. It's a good place for some diving, as I've been told. I'm not a diver myself, but again, Red Sea, pretty decent sized body of water off the Indian Ocean. The Atlas Mountains, we just talked about that. Some orographic rainfall that comes into play. But the Atlas Mountains seen there. The Elburz Mountains, which is off of Tehran, in Iran, Tehran, capital city of Iran. Elburz Mountains right there. Moving on to the environment. Water. Predominant water use in this region is for agriculture and food production. Agriculture and food production pretty related, but not really important to the general GDP, GNP of a country, because what we'd have is, so for instance, in Tunisia, as an example, 9.5% of their economy relies on agriculture, relies on this, but meanwhile, 80+% of their water use is dedicated to it. So it's not balanced, but of course we know that 70% of all water use in the world goes to irrigation and agriculture, so not to be surprised here that this region is any different. Certainly going to have a need for irrigation here because relying on natural water to come from the sky or to come from some of these other areas, certainly not happening. Salinization terms, little vocabulary terms in bold, and pay attention to it, I guess. But it's a process where evaporation of the water leaves the salty mineral deposits, naturally speaking, or a result of irrigation, sort of in the soil, and it sort of harms it in this way. Drip irrigation, the Israelis use it in Israel as a practice. It's a little bit more efficient for water use. Again, the book talks about that in terms of this whole region together is guided by the Quran. Water conservation is a key point, and sort of conservation in all aspects. But something that I would want to point out in terms of water in this region, Turkey, most water resources in the entire region, Turkey. Remember that. Followed by Iran, and then Iraq, and then Syria. Again, these are kind of dry places when you think about it, but it shows you how scarce water is, fresh water is here. But again, Iran, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria. Turkey, water, number one. It's going to be on the test. There's one for you. Worry about water. Oh boy. Okay, the Aswan Dam, Aswan High Dam. In Egypt, Nile River, it's thrown some things out of whack ecologically speaking. So they use this for energy production. It generates a lot of energy. But there's some ecological factors that go into play when you totally disturb a major world river. It's had an increase in schistosomiasis. That is a vector-borne disease. Activities such as this leave you kind of vulnerable to it when you're recreating or bathing or messing around in fresh water, especially unclean fresh water. There's a freshwater parasite, a worm that comes from freshwater snails and infect people with schistosomiasis. Kind of important in terms of a disease that affects tons and tons of people around the world, especially in this region and other regions that are kind of similar to this in terms of its human-environment interactions that surround upon water in this context. But important in this region specifically because of dams like this that have affected or increased the likelihood of coming into contact with this disease. Great man-made river, termed by Muammar Gaddafi. He called it the eighth wonder of the world, something that he led up. It's the largest irrigation system and piping system in the world. It's to get water inland into areas, again, for irrigation, for agriculture, in that of the country of Libya. Interesting. Agriculture and food production, this map just kind of shows you what's going on in which part. Obviously, speaking here, not much happening here in terms of this beige color, but this yellow, pastoral nomadism. So these are people that are moving around, probably with cattle and things like that, moving around. Obviously, some agriculture is taking place here because we talked about some of these reasons why agriculture would be taking place there because of some rainfall happening. Interesting here, you see this stark divide in the Sudan. Okay, about halfway here, you see nomadism and not much happening, and then all of a sudden you see total agriculture. Take a little mental picture of that, and we're going to come back to that. I'm going to remind you, but we're going to come back to that. So look at that and put that in your head. Desertification, we talked about this a little bit. It's when the ecological changes that actually cause a desert to expand, expansion of the Sahara in this case, getting larger and causing problems obviously for folks that have to live in that region because it's not certainly not a friendly place to try to support human life. North Africa and Southwest Asia import more wheat than any other region in the world. Well, cue Alanis Morissette because that's ironic. They once were. This is where wheat came from. Okay, so it's kind of ironic that they actually wheat comes from here, and now they have to import more than any other place in the world. So it's pretty crazy. I would say it's a fun fact, but we may disagree on what we consider fun. But fun fact for you, that's one. And seawater desalinization is when taking salt water from the oceans and converting that into drinking water. Saudi Arabia relies on it as a majority for their drinking water. Very expensive, very energy dependent, and it emits, you're using fossil fuels, it emits bad things in the environment, of course, just like anything that would be energy intense. So it's not exactly a great practice, but it's sort of a necessary practice in some of these cases. In terms of vulnerability to climate change broadly, increasingly high temperatures are happening here. These are places that can get up to 130 degrees in the shade. Ooh, we think North Florida is bad in the summertime with our humidity, but this is a whole different wickedness here. Sea level rise could impact places like the Nile Delta and influence that area. Fossil fuels, of course, people are sort of shying away from those, trying to save the planet, trying to save the world. These people rely on fossil fuels because of the oil-dominated economy, and they're not really putting their eggs outside of that basket. So it's leaving them vulnerable, economically speaking, but vulnerable thus to climate change generally. That ends part 1. That's 26 minutes on the dot, and now counting. But that takes care of the physical geography, the environment, and sort of setting up the differences that'll take place due to some religious differences that are found in the region. So get ready for part 2.